So for everyone on the line, I think we're officially ready to kick off here. Happy to have Chris Combs with us today during this lunch hour, co-founder and CEO of LinkSquares. Chris was over at Venture Lane, I think several months ago at this point, leading a session with some of our founders and heads of sales about qualifying leads, all with an eye towards increasing ultimately that conversion rate at the end of the sales process. That was a great session that I think a lot of people took a lot of things away from. But Chris is back, graciously stepped forward when we sort of reached out to all of our mentors saying, next month of programming, we're gonna retool it, and everything we do is going to be a little more timely and a little more geared towards helping founders and startups kind of navigate this new normal. So thank you, Chris, for stepping forward and coming forward with this topic of managing cash burn during a time like this when it certainly becomes more of a priority. So in just a moment, we'll let Chris take it away. We'll hear his backstory quickly, and then sort of launch into the content that he has prepared for this 45 minutes. For everyone who's tuned in, if you sort of look at the bottom of your Zoom screen and hover over that bottom bar, there's a Q&A button. At any point, Chris has agreed that interactive here is the way to go. So if at any point you have questions or want Chris to clarify a point that he's making, if you just hit that Q&A button and type your question into that portal, then we'll politely interject and send that question Chris's way. And if we need additional clarification, we can always unmute attendees too and have a little bit of chatter. So all that being said, we'll turn it over to Chris and hear a little bit about managing cash runway right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And happy to help out any way I can. Obviously, as I was saying, it's unprecedented times, and we're all kind of, in this together, trying to learn and do the best we can with the situation we have. So I'm happy to kind of share my experiences. Again, this is unprecedented for me as well. So I, don't have all the answers, but I can try to share the experiences I've had and the different things I've learned, over the last 10, 15 years working in startups and business, and, happy to kind of dive in. As was said, please stop along the way and ask questions. I really prefer this to be interactive and so, don't hesitate to reach out or ask to dive deeper on something. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. So with that said, I'll go ahead and jump in here to the presentation.
And actually, Chris, if you don't mind, maybe just a quick 1-2 minutes at the most, just your backstory and your
absolutely
founder.
Yeah. So 100%. It's actually part of the presentation. So it's right at the beginning. So I'm happy to kind of add some color there. Can you see my screen? Looking good on that front?
All good.
Awesome. Cool. So the thing I want to talk about today is essentially, helping companies, startups, which I think is the bulk of the audience, and try to be as relevant. But if there's anything unique to your situation, or if you guys are different stage or anything like that, feel free to kind of drop something in the chat to let me know. Any kind of unique situations, but really just trying to help understand the financials and how this situation impacts a company, and how they can ultimately try to weather this storm, right? Which is this downturn, and trying to have a situation where you can set yourself up so you can come out on the other side, you know, and in position to kind of continue, you know, moving forward with your business. So that's kind of, you know, what I want to cover today. Um, and if you kind of just break it out into a little more detail, you know, talking about cash burn and your runway, and what those mean, you know, and how you can help to manage cash so that you keep enough runway to get through this time. Talk through some real business scenarios and you know, strategy, philosophy, some things I've learned along the way. Um, so about me. Uh, you know, I've spoken at Venture Lane a couple times. Know the folks there and team there very well, and so hopefully maybe some of you attended some previous talks. But if not, you know, happy to kind of share a little bit about myself. So, um, moved to Boston in 2013, just in time for the couple big blizzards that we got the next year or two. And you know, had a background in technology, startups, pretty much since I graduated college. Studied in Europe for a little while at the University of London, and you know, I've kind of been working in earlier stage startups since that time, mostly on the business side, business development, sales, account management, operations. You know, you know, but still always pretty heavily involved. You know, founding a couple companies from scratch. You know, pretty heavily involved in product, UX design, and you know, part of, you know, what I really enjoy is taking an idea and helping, you know, and getting the first 10 customers for that company, and then being able to kind of, you know, focus in on nailing that first step so that a company can be in position to do a couple things. One is just to understand, you know, how important the idea that you had is it validated? Is there a really strong business there? Is it going to be worth dedicating the next 10 years plus years of your life to? And then ultimately trying to get in position so that you can scale it up from there. And you know, I always say, if you got 10 customers, you can get 100. And if you can get 100, you can get 1,000. And, you know, so that's kind of, you know, how I like to approach building companies. So you'll kind of hear that lens today, which is more, you know, sort of focusing on managing your startups in a way that you can validate those things and you buy enough time to accomplish a lot of that, so that you can come out on the other side potentially ready to raise some money from angel investors or VC firms, and you know, scale the business from there. And that's kind of you know, my current role. The company I most recently founded was LinkSquares. We started the company in 2015 after a handful of years at Backupify. Went through an acquisition there, and that was actually where we had the aha moment. They, going through the acquisition, they actually had some questions about our contracts and customer agreements and things we had agreed to, and decisions that they were trying to make, you know, as a, you know, integrating the newly acquired business. And so we realized that there was really no good way to understand what a company had agreed to historically, in terms of their contracts, and especially if you're doing red lines in your customer agreements, you can end up with a lot of different scenarios out there. And so, you know, that was kind of, we went to look for some tools that could help us understand and do more contract analytics, what was in the business agreements and what trends and details should we be aware of. And there really wasn't anything out there. It was really around creating contracts and the process for creating something, you know, a contract from the start. But really, we were more interested in what happens after it's been signed, and, you know, what information could be buried in those contracts that companies like Datto, when they acquired Backupify, they needed to know. And so, started there, essentially bootstrapped the company to our first 10, 15 customers. Just learned a lot from them. We were fortunate enough to have some companies like local Boston companies like DraftKings and Carbonite that were able to build, the product in their back office and work directly with them. From there, we realized that we were on to something pretty strong, and that the bigger companies got, the more contracts they had, the more pain that they had around this problem. So we ended up kind of working our way up through the enterprise with Boston companies like Pegasystems that are almost 10,000 employees, and ultimately ended up raising several rounds of venture capital. I believe is almost 22 million across 3 rounds, from firms like Hyperplane here locally, Mass Mutual Ventures here locally in Boston, and then 2 groups out of Chicago, Jump Capital being the most recent one of those, and another law firm that cannot name publicly, but one of the largest law firms in the world. So it's been a really good experience so far. We've learned a lot. We're certainly doing well as a business, and just recently raised our A round. So this downturn is a little different for us, but we're still experiencing a lot of challenges moving, 75 people to a remote working environment, trying to keep the pace that we have going. Also, each year our goals get bigger. So we're trying to keep all those things on track and manage, a really fast growing business in a challenging time. So I'm happy to kind of share some of the things that we're doing right now. But also, again, looking back across my experience and experiencing going through 2008 in a startup that ultimately failed, and the impact that had, what the layoffs process was like, all of that. So that's what I'll be digging into today. So what's going on right now? Really, like what is actually happening in the business environment? Obviously, I'm not a medical expert, so I will spare you the 2 cents on the virus and the medical issues that the community is experiencing right now. But in terms of business specifically, what you're seeing is into, I believe, the longest bull run in the history of our country, if not the longest, one of the longest. So a period of unprecedented business growth, many companies doing extremely well, lots of venture capital, more venture funds than ever in the history of the world, have raised money. There's tons of investment opportunities. And so that's what we've been experiencing for the last, 5+ years, really 10+ years. You want to think about it, since the last major downturn. But in particular, the last 5 years has been really strong growth. And so, the events that have occurred in the last month, certainly have changed that. And kind of when you look at what is happening between Q1, which we just wrapped up yesterday, and Q2 here, is going to be a major downturn. I'm not an expert. I don't know how bad it's going to be, or how long this is going to last. But let's just focus on what we do know, which is the economy's taken a hit over the last few weeks, and now we're looking into probably May at a minimum before things get going again. So we're looking at at least a couple months of major downturn. This comes with high uncertainty. Investors are going to be more careful and, potentially stepping out, hitting the pause button. So that leaves kind of startups with a situation of trying to continue to navigate this environment on their own without a lot of you know, outlets to potentially help out. You know, and then if you're kind of looking ahead, it's most likely that this will impact future growth as well. You know, I know that our business had a good first quarter, but we've already lost a significant portion of the pipeline that we've been building throughout the year. So, you know, we are expecting that the next few quarters will not be as strong, and that the future growth will most likely be modest. And I think it's kind of safe to assume that until we know differently. You know, and obviously I'm hoping that that's, you know, not the case for a very long time, but I think at this point, you know, we have to, you know, take it for face value what we think is going to happen here. So let's talk about how these changes in the environment impact your business. And let's just start with some basic formulas here. So, you know, burn rate in your cash burn is a pretty simple formula. You're simply taking your monthly expenses and you're subtracting your revenue from that. And the cash that ends up, you know, spending going out of the bank every month is your net burn rate. So for some businesses, you know, that operate kind of in a bootstrap model, you know, non-tech, high growth companies, you know, this is kind of how they look at the world every month is making sure that they have enough revenue to cover their expenses. But, you know, kind of in the high growth technology world, it's kind of expected and understood that you will be burning some cash because you're investing in growth. So most tech companies that I know do not run profitably. At least, you know, they even if they could, they most likely would prefer to invest more in growth and take that revenue and put it more towards growth and try to grow faster. And so that's how you end up with a burn rate, which is, you know, every month some amount of cash goes out the door for your business. And, you know, you have a bank account with cash in it, and you're trying to manage that cash burn into a runway, right? So if we look at kind of the basic definition of runway, it's what I call, you know, taking the cash in bank, dividing it by your monthly burn rate, and that will give you the number of months of runway that you likely have left in the business. So let's just take this into an example. If you're averaging monthly expenses were around 40, let's say a little over $40,000, and you're generating $25,000 a month in revenue, you know, you're burning at that point around $17,000 a month. Now, some months this might fluctuate. Some months, you know, in this example, you may have to pay a recruiting fee, or you may have a, you know, investment in marketing. So maybe that jumps up to 20, but then maybe the next month that jumps down to 14. You know, so this net burn is actually going to be an average of, you know, the last months. So in our case, we kind of try to look at the last 6 months or the last 12 months and see what the difference is there. Maybe 12 months ago you were burning a ridiculous amount of money, or you had no sales, and, you know, maybe 6 months ago your sales started to pick up. So you don't want that average to necessarily be, you know, not indicative of the current situation. So we try to kind of get a trailing look at the last few consistent periods. Maybe it's a 6-month period. Maybe you want to stretch that out and look, you know, in more detail across 12 months if it makes sense. You know, but ultimately you're going to come up with an average number there, and you're going to say, you know, every month for the last 6-8 months on average, we've been burning $16,600. That's what we think. We're consistently doing based on the salaries we have, all these things. So let's just, for big round numbers, say you had $100,000 in the bank. Now you take that average burn rate, 16,670, and you divide it by the $100,000 in cash you have. That's going to equal out to 5.99 months, or to round up, 6 months of runway is what you have. So that's just quick back of the napkin math, how you can figure out how much runway your business has. And I really like to do this kind of modeling, all the time. I will, even today, we have a CFO who does, much more detail, but, it's helpful for me to just get a feel for, especially right before we go fundraise, do we need to slow down a little bit so that we have more time and a little more flexibility going into the fundraise? Or, do we have enough cash and revenues are looking strong enough that, maybe we're in good shape. We have, a year of capital. That way, if fundraising doesn't go well, and in this environment, the likelihood that could happen is much higher, then you have some back of the napkin thinking around how long the business can stay moving and what decisions you need to make. The last thing I would say here is that, we're looking at 6 months runway in this example, but you would never want to just say, oh, well, we have 6 months to figure this out. Well, you can't plan to zero. You should be, making significant business changes probably around 2 months out. So in this case, you really actually, while the math shows you have 6 months of runway, you really only have maybe 3 to 4 months of runway, because at some point you're going to have to make some more significant changes and decisions about what your plan is. You can't just run it to zero and then try to figure it out. Ultimately, that's how startups fail, right? Is when they run out of cash. So you're going to be wanting to take that 6 month number and back off of it half to, maybe 4 months in this case, and say, all right, in 4 months, I need to really get sales going or get my burn down. But at the end of that 4 month period, I'm going to make some major decisions, whether it's cuts, whatever I need to do to make sure that we don't just continue to drive the car into the wall. As an example, analogy I like to use. So you want to be thinking a little bit more ahead than just, the sheer number of months. Any questions about burn, runway, any of that? I know it's generally pretty basic, but just want to start off from the same point.
All good so far, looks like.
Awesome. Good deal. All right. So what can you do as a business now that you've kind of got this basic thinking around your cash burn, your runway? So what I'd really recommend, just again, kind of back the napkin, high level stuff, get some spreadsheet activity going. Essentially evaluate what scenarios you're probably most likely going to be dealing with. One thing I like to do is assume, if you think sales are going to continue forward and looking pretty good, maybe you continue the current trajectory of sales. But also you probably want to model out lower sales, and then even in a worst case scenario, what if sales just completely stops? What if sales dries out? What if you lose, a key employee, key salesperson? Plan for kind of this scenario in which sales go much, much lower, or even worse, if you, again, just want to get a feel for your runway, assuming you don't sell anything else for the rest of the year, right? Sounds extreme, but again, we're just modeling, and when we model, we want to model conservatively just in case. So one of the scenarios I would run is no new sales or minimal new sales, like, just kind of the base sales, and then figure out how that impacts your burn and how that impacts your runway. You may be surprised to find that under that scenario, you maybe only have 3 months, 4 months, right? Which is, really, something you should be aware of ASAP and be making key decisions around. So, important to know the different scenarios and just what you might be faced with that you might not be aware of. Like you can't, predict the future, but you can at least model and assume worst case scenario. I know what my plan is. So what should you be looking at? I mean, really, if I'm kind of doing a startup right now, I really want to try to at least model my runway out into 2021. Most businesses kind of in our stage are really, sort of modeling out 12 plus months in advance. But many startups are not going to be in that boat. Not everyone has raised an A round, and I've definitely been on both sides of the coin. Many startups will kind of be looking at a more, shortened timeline. So, you really want to try to model a few scenarios. One, at a base, again, how can we get to May? How can we get to May so that when things hopefully pick back up, we're in a good spot to continue to operate the business and get sales going again, really, right? Or, continue the effort around sales. So you want to be modeling, a really rough Q2, and then maybe things opening back up in Q3, and then maybe model a rough Q2, Q3, and things kind of opening back up in Q4, and then maybe another scenario where the rest of this year is just completely lost. How can I get to 2021, in some sort of shape or fashion so that the business does not have to shut down? This is kind of what I call the cockroach analogy. Paul Graham from Y Combinator has sort of coined this term, which is like, as a startup, you really need to be hard to kill. And the best companies, the Airbnbs of the world, who, those guys went out and sold cereal boxes and, rented out their own apartments and did all these things just to get going and kind of surviving their challenging startup phase so that they could then, ultimately raise money and now, gotten much bigger since then. So, you want to really think about how can we make it so that this business is really tough to kill. One is get the cash burn to a bare minimum, either get your sales going or cut your expenses down. And we'll get into exactly some of the things you want to try to be doing, but ultimately the goal of this exercise is to model out some scenarios that make it really tough for you to die. Make sure that the cash does not run out and that you can try to come out on the other side with a plan to get things going again.
Chris, just a quick time check. We're going to go till about 12:45.
Great. How are we so far? Okay. So what if you're low on cash? What can you do? So let's say your modeling shows, we're really in tough spots. So here are the things that I really would recommend. I mean, if you have any lines of credit or access to investors, banks, potentially the new SBA relief and stimulus that just came through, I would be pursuing those avenues, at least spending some portion of your time, pursuing those avenues. Customers that owe you money, make sure you're collecting. Make sure you ramp up those collection efforts. I just was working with my recruiter today, knowing that they're taking a really hard hit right now. Nobody's recruiting, nobody's hiring as much. So making sure that that we get them paid up, and then we're doing, as we are their customer, we're doing the same thing with our customers. making sure that, things don't go past due. The other thing you can do is start to contact your vendors, and they're aware of the situation, asking for discounts or the ability to spread some payments out, again with the idea of keeping that burn, your operating expenses low. Start looking at your spend. Start looking at all those things, and anything that's not business critical. If you're doing some like ads that aren't returning you, sales, if you committed to some event down the road that maybe you're concerned is not going to happen, if you can get a refund now, cutting all that spend out and recouping that cash is an important thing. The other thing that you can do is implement a hiring freeze. Don't add any more burn or expenses right now until you get a better grip on what to do. The other thing that you can do is start looking at more budgeting, implementing approvals, cutting company perks. And anything you cut, as the leader of the business, you want to lead by example first. And if you give up something, the company gives up something, you should be giving it up as well, and making sure that you're leading your team by example, because it's a really tough time for people. So what if things continue to get worse from there, right? You start to make these changes and adjustments in the business. What if things continue to get worse from there? And this is the stuff, again, it's not fun to talk about. Like I've been through these experiences, letting employees go, making cuts to your startup, sort of some of these things. But it's important to probably talk about, right? And everyone sort of experience that and be prepared for something like this. So the thing you want to do is essentially stack rank your employees, and so who you consider sort of where on the scale, and begin to kind of trim from the bottom if you can, and that way you keep your most important and your most key folks first. Even if they're higher paid, I would try to keep them. You want to sort of make your adjustments from trimming from the bottom, and have that ranking, and you may continue to adjust that ranking along the way. It's something I recommend to all managers that manage teams, is to constantly have that in play. From there, you may just have to outright remove your vendors, contractors, consultants. Those folks, just have to cut them and let them know that you're on pause, or you want to pick this back up later in the year, but you can't do any work with them right now. The next thing you may consider, cutting salaries. It's tough again, but may be important. And again, you probably want to lead by example first and foremost. If it continues to get worse, you want to may ask employees to take unpaid time off, convert to part-time, or a leave of absence for a few months. Again, really tough situations that I'll expand on here. Ultimately, you want to get to a point, and that's why I put this graph in, that you are at the break even, which means little to no burn in the company. The money that you're bringing in is the money that you're operating with, and that means the business can run forever at that stage, right? You want to keep a little cash in the bank, get to a break-even point, and try to run it from there until you can open it back up, hopefully later in the year. So, knowing where your break-even is, where your revenue is, and how you can get your costs to that point, it's going to be really important. So, kind of in the interest of time, I won't dive into this, but I'm happy to share this, with you guys. The different ways you can downsize. Obviously, laying off people, putting them on unpaid leave, or ultimately reducing salary. So how can you communicate all this to the team, right? I think it's important for you to be transparent, be vulnerable, understand that people's lives are here. They, maybe going through really challenging times. So being compassionate, when you're talking to your team about these things. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity to inspire them, right? this is an opportunity for the company to rise to the occasion. And I was really excited to see what our team did in Q1, knowing the situation, really rose to the occasion. And that's an opportunity for you to do that with your team as well. Keep providing updates, letting people knowing what's going on. All these super important things that, you want to be constantly communicating with compassion, transparency, humility, during this time. The other thing, and this is kind of getting towards wrapping up, but you really want to, and this is probably the most important thing, you really want to empower your sales team right now. If you have one, if it's you, I've been there. I've been the single founder selling every day by myself. You really got to empower your sales team to move forward. People are still buying things. It is definitely less, but people are still buying. Our sales team is still actively selling every day. It is working. It can be done. So, this is one path forward, and probably the most efficient path, is just to continue selling, continue obviously managing your business, your burn, your runway, but continuing to sell too, and, enabling your sales team to do that. The couple things I would keep in mind during this time is, talking about new prospecting strategies. You really want to be avoiding industries, hospitality, hotels, travel, airlines, all these things that are taking massive hits. Probably not the best place to sell to. They probably have budget freezes across the board, major downsizing, major cuts. So I would avoid those industries. You also want to approach these situations with empathy and understanding. This is not the time for the, hard, heavy sales pitch coming in. It's just not going to resonate well. People are going through a lot of different situations. You want to show that you're thinking about that and you're aware as well. So you may want to update your messaging with your team just to make sure that they're messaging these situations correctly. And knowing that when you have a conversation, more often now than before, is going to turn into a not right now type of conversation. So you may want to be aware of the need to nurture a conversation instead of just going in for the close. The other thing is, maybe this is a time to carve out some time and think of some other productive efforts the team can be doing. Growing existing accounts, retaining customers, because if you're losing all your customers, sales is a lot less relevant. So you may prioritize that much higher now, and you may dedicate some of your own efforts to making sure you're keeping the customers you do have right now. And updating the sales team's incentives to reflect all this activity, right? What do you want them doing? What's best for the business? How do you want them approaching it? And update the incentives to make it so. So those are the kind of the things that I would be thinking about, so that you continue to move forward as a business while keeping an eye to your burn, your runway, and making sure you got cash to continue through this difficult time. So that's it. Right on time.
Right on time.
Thanks for having me on today. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. I think there's a lot of emphasis right now when doing cost analysis and taking your burn into consideration on the cost side only. So it's good to see kind of a reminder that you can empower the sales teams and make some considerations there to maintain sales and maybe even improve productivity right now.
Right. It definitely can happen. I've really been surprised to see what our team's been able to band together and do right now. So you don't want to stay in the oh shit moment for too long, right? You kind of want to acknowledge the situation, spend some time analyzing your business and where you can go from here, and then getting back to work, and grinding it through this tough time.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm just going to take one quick moment here and share my screen as well. For everyone who's tuned in, great session that we just had with Chris about managing Runway. And just to keep you up to date, just to keep you up to date on the Venture Lane side, obviously we're trying to slate a lot of different sessions with some folks like Chris to help startups and founders kind of manage the current climate as effectively as possible. So just a quick look at what's coming up this week for us. Every weekday, so through Friday, 6:45 a.m., bright and early for all the early risers, or the late risers who maybe want to give it a try. We have Jim Lopata, head of coaching supervision at ASUP, but also meditation coach and practitioner, leading us all in a morning meditation. On Thursday at 12 p.m., we have contingency planning, lessons learned from the 2008 recession, Great Recession. And Douglas Kim, Chief Growth Officer at Cogito, will be leading us through sort of his take on contingency planning as he's learned through former crises. And also on Thursday at 2 p.m., we have our Fighting Bulls series. So our founder, Christian Mogul, and Brian Denberg, managing partner of Agile Sales Method. They'll be interviewing current CEO of Localytics, Jude McClogan. I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but we'll get it right on the webinar. And this series is all around getting some founders in front of everybody who are kind of taking the bull by the horns and finding some opportunity and having some success, all things considered. So feel free to take a quick screenshot, capture the Zoom IDs, and down below, as you can see, you can always follow Venture Lane on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter, and we're going to keep everyone as up to date as possible on all the new content that we're pushing out, because it's changing weekly, just as everyone kind of reassesses day to day and week to week, and trying to keep things as relevant as possible. So thank you again to Chris. Thanks for spending 45 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I think you shared your contact information on that last slide as well, in case maybe
I did.
Folks on the webinar have some follow-up questions.
Yeah. Anyone has any follow-up questions or anything that I can help with during this time, certainly feel free to shoot me an email, reach out to me on Twitter, anything like that. I'm happy to help provide some insights or thoughts along the way. So.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you. All right, guys.
And we'll see everyone for the next upcoming session. Thanks, Chris.
All right. See you guys.